Thank you for joining me today. Just to introduce myself, my name is Annie, and I created Sustainability Beyond the Lab to make sustainable research more accessible for general audiences, as well as showcase barriers that prevent their scale up in also an accessible way. Could you also give a brief introduction of yourself as well as your research at the National Lab of the Rockies?
Yes, thank you for having me. My name is Whitney Trainor-Guitton. I started out with an undergrad degree in geophysics, or officially geophysical engineering from Colorado School of Mines. My interest was always groundwater, so I wanted to be able to better understand and characterize how groundwater flowed and that led me then eventually to Stanford University, where I also did another master's degree in geophysics, but was doing a lot more geostatistics. So, meaning um, trying to understand from very limited data observations, how could we extrapolate those or interpolate them and also combine different data types. And so then my PhD was looking at how can we justify collecting more data for
Mhm,
groundwater problems. So I looked at what we call managed aquifer recharge and also how do we decide how to remediate an aquifer, so if it's contaminated, um, how do we best remove those contaminants and understand where they are, because that's the hardest part, the subsurface.
mhm,
Eventually, I had a postdoc that got me into geothermal. So now I just say I do hot water instead of just groundwater. And at the National Lab of the Rockies, I've continued to use the similar techniques from my PhD, but looking how do we de-risk looking for geothermal resources. But I'm also the lead of a portfolio of projects that really look how does geothermal fit into the larger energy models at the National Lab of the Rockies. So it's a really fun role of making sure geothermal resources and the characteristics of geothermal power are well modeled in grid models, so the electric grid, but also in heating and cooling. So
mhm.
we can use geothermal heat pumps to heat our buildings.
Yeah, thank you for that overview.
Mhm.
Um, I've noticed much of your work, as you mentioned, focuses on like geothermal, as well as its like applications, for example. For someone unfamiliar with the field of geothermal, what problem is it mostly trying to solve, as well as why is it important for expanding clean energy?
Right. So electricity requires, electrons to be on the grid. And so it requires often a turbine that spins a magnet that creates those electrons. So traditionally, what we call hydrothermal are these naturally hot water flowing areas that then allow us to move a turbine with that hot water or steam, and that produces electrons for our grid. And that's carbon free because it's just the natural hot waters of the earth. And so many of those fields were discovered because there was some expression. You can think Yellowstone if you want, but usually typically much smaller on that scale. But they knew they were there because there was something steaming coming out of the ground or water was coming out. But we've slowly found out, and I'm mostly familiar with the Great Basin, so Nevada area. When a farmer would go to drill a water well, they would find really hot water, or if a miner was looking for silver or gold, they would find really hot water. So we know that there's what we call blind or hidden systems. So there could be these same kind of hot water systems, but they just don't have a surficial expression to tell us they're there. So that's a lot of my work has been how can we explore for these using, again, geophysics, which I realize now I didn't really define, but it's an indirect way to really probe the earth. So think of your CAT scan in the doctor's office or an MRI. We have the
Mhm.
same techniques for the subsurface of the Earth to kind of understand what's down there.
Yeah. One of the biggest and most like obvious problems with geothermal energy is that we can't see directly what's happening underground. What tools or techniques does your work use to make it easier to characterize the subsurface before drilling?
Yeah, so I'll use the example of the very first technique that I used on my first geothermal project, and it's
Mhm.
called magnetotellurics, and it's a type of electromagnetic technique. And it takes advantage of the fact that when you have hot water circulating in the subsurface, it will change the rocks. So what happens usually is the hot water circulating will turn the rocks into clay.
Mhm.
And clay has very different electromagnetic or electric properties than other surrounding rocks. So the magnetotellurics allows us to make measurements on the surface, and then we can make interpretations of those signals. What does that mean about the properties below the surface? And
Mhm.
so we use a lot of mathematical and computer science techniques in order to turn those signals that we measured just on the surface to then make models. So they could be 2D models of what's down below or 3D models of what does all of the structure underneath
Yeah.
the earth look like.
Yeah.
So that's one technique, and it's kind of old, tried and true for geothermal. But of course, there's still a lot of uncertainty
Mhm.
around that.
Yeah. Your work kind of combines like geophysics as well as that modeling, and the energy systems analysis. How has bringing like these different aspects of like geothermal research together changed the way that these resources are explored?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I would say we're still working all of these out. But yeah, that has been kind of a theme of my work is to make sure that we are really representing our uncertainty of those models by making many of them. And so that,
Mhm.
yes, requires statistics, machine learning as well. One of the aspects I didn't touch on is ideally, we will not only rely on the magnetotellurics, but also look at other types of data. It could be, structural geology data. It could be direct measurements from what we call borehole, so an actual drilling down into the earth. And so we really are trying to integrate all of those and make sure that they're all giving us a consistent answer. That helps us reduce our uncertainty on our 3D models of what we think the subsurface
Mhm.
is.
Yeah, it's really interesting hearing all these different like techniques or tools that are used in geothermal.
Mhm. Yes, yeah, the subsurface is complex and a
Mhm.
puzzle, and so yeah, it requires many different tools to hopefully help you with the answer.
Are there any projects that you're currently working on or have worked on that are really interesting or like innovative?
Um, Hopefully they're all a little bit innovative,
Yeah.
but of course it depends. Yeah. Uh, oh, what's a good one that's current? Well, I've a lot of what I've said so far comes from a project that it has an acronym called Ingenious, and it's actually really led by the University of Nevada, Reno, and it
Mhm.
is, trying to do exactly that, have an innovative explorations for these hidden systems. I would say I'm really excited about a project that's about to kick off. And that acronym we're calling Converge. And it is talking about Colorado and New Mexico value of geothermal for the grid revolution, I think is something like that.
Mhm.
And it's really trying to look both at an electrical grid perspective, so modeling what the grid um, what we forecast are going to be the needs of the electrical grid with, everyone's hearing about data centers,
Mhm.
um, and uh, also looking at potentially different policies that help, spur different sources of energy. And going back to that, what is our best guess of what the geothermal resources might be in Colorado and New
Yeah.
Mexico? And between those two states right now, there's really only one geothermal operating power plant, but we're hopeful that we can that others will be developed, discovered, and then developed. And so this project is looking at where is the highest value for geothermal to be, given what we think the electrical grid needs are, but also looking at different value that geothermal power brings. Like I think you said at the beginning, it doesn't depend on the weather or
Yeah.
time of day. It can always be there. And so we're hoping through this project to really highlight those value streams that geothermal bring and digging into those two regions.
Yeah. It sounds like geothermal definitely has a lot of benefits over other renewable sources. What are kind of the barriers that do prevent it from being scaled up?
We've, touched on it this whole time. It's really the upfront risk,
Mhm.
right, of knowing do you have a resource that exists in that location, and it's a capital heavy or has a
Mhm.
high cost to drill those wells. And so that has always, I think, been the hardest part is it requires this big investment up front.
Mhm.
And, then instead of just immediately having electrons, you then need to build that power plant. So having that kind of structural risk at the beginning has made it harder.
Mhm.
But there are cool projects that there's been, cost share projects that go on with from the United States government that kind of help shoulder some of that risk and try to really ignite investment from the private industry.
Mhm. Yeah. Looking into the future, maybe 10 to 20 years, are there any developments in geothermal or other renewable energy that you're excited about?
Yeah, I would be remiss not to mention what we call next generation geothermal. So, as I mentioned, these hydrothermal resources kind of expect your fluids,
Yeah.
your what we call permeability, and your heat all to exist there naturally. But we know that there's heat everywhere in the subsurface. The fun fact we like to say is that the core of the Earth is the same temperature as the surface of the sun.
Hmm.
And so if we can get to economic temperatures that aren't too deep, then we could harness that heat. And so these next gen technologies, often called enhanced or engineered geothermal systems,
Hmm.
they create their own permeability by stimulating the rock and then introduce cold water in order to be the mechanism of sweeping that heat and bring it up and having the turbine. And so there is a lot of excitement, a lot of venture capital that's in that area. And so, um, yeah, there's a lot of optimism that geothermal could be everywhere if we understand how to efficiently kind of design and operate these kinds of systems.
Yeah. I'm really interested in like enhanced geothermal systems as well. But yeah, I'd love to look more into that.
Yeah, there's I think I heard like 5 years ago, there was 50 geothermal startups, and now there's 250,
Wow.
something like that. So there is a lot of excitement and capital, which is
Mhm.
great because there's a lot of learning still to be done for
Yeah.
sure.
Before we wrap up, is there anything that we didn't get a chance to discuss during the interview that you think is important for general audiences to know?
Yeah, I think one other very close adjacent topic that we work on as well, and I briefly mentioned, is heating and cooling as well. So lots of people have heard of air source heat pumps, or just they usually say heat pumps, but geothermal heat pumps uh, utilize the kind of constant temperature of the near subsurface. So
Mhm.
instead of pulling in cold winter air, heating that up, and then using that to space heat your home. Geothermal heat pumps uh, utilize, 50 feet down in the earth, that the fact that that stays at, I think, about 55 Fahrenheit all year round. So
Mhm.
you can just have a much more efficient system if you're pulling that and heating that up 55 degrees up instead of freezing temperatures. And the same goes in the summer. You would be cooling down 55 versus cooling down, say, 100 F. So
Mhm.
I think it's important for everyone to be aware of those. And then also, um, the other topics, we like to say that geothermal is a triple resource. Not
Mhm.
only is it heating and power, um, but it also can provide minerals. So you might look at Salton Sea in Southern California. There's lithium within some of those geothermal brines, so that can be a source of critical minerals.
Yeah.
And then lastly, we do a lot of research on how the subsurface can be a energy storage mechanism as well. So you can, store hot or cold water in different subsurface features like abandoned well bores or mined out pits or in depleted oil reservoirs as well.
Mhm. Yeah. Thank you for sharing both your research as well as your perspective. I found it really interesting.